Preparation time has expired. Welcome to the judge test of Debate 2016. The motion for this debate is this House to make tax exemption to religious organizations contingent upon them not discriminating, i.e. refusing to perform religious services, not allowing participation by homosexuals. Without any further ado, I'd like to call upon the Prime Minister to make her speech when the sound is here.
Since the beginning of the millennium, religious organizations have been gradually changing. In 2013, Pope Francis admitted that being gay was an okay state. In 2015, a woman was elected an Anglican bishop in the country of England. However, we say that liberalization has not gone to the extent that we want it to go. On the other hand, in countries such as America, some churches still refuse to conduct gay marriages. Some churches still refuse entrance into the evangelical congregation, and we think that the government still needs to engineer that kind of change in these religious organizations. We at the government believe that we want to protect the right of these individuals to religion, and we want these to protect the autonomy of these religious organizations. However, we also want to engineer that social change that will provide all of these social benefits to all of these people. Therefore, we say that what strikes the best balance between these two is tax exemptions. We think that this is the best way because it deprives these organizations of privileges that they don't absolutely need, but it is still a direct harm, and that might cause these organizations to rethink their calculuses and therefore change their attitudes to these people. Therefore, that's why we're extremely proud to propose today. I have two arguments from Prime Minister. Firstly, why discrimination can be a criteria for the deprivation of these tax exemptions, and secondly, why this leads to the possibility or a nudge for more equal change on the part of these religious organizations. So firstly, let's talk about the relationship between the state and religious organizations. Why did the state provide these religious organizations with tax exemptions in the first place? It does so because religious organizations provide the kind of, firstly, mental security and stability that the state can provide. For example, it has community services, right? It has mass. It provides these people with the kind of psychological assuagement of suffering that only the spiritual can provide. The government can't provide those kinds of services. That's why they pay these organizations to boost up. But furthermore, secondly, we say that the religious organizations provide services to citizens that the government can't absolutely provide. We believe that organizations such as the Catholic Church have provided a lot of donations to poor people. They set up soup kitchens, they set up homeless centers for all of these people, and they provide all of these services that the government can't exactly provide. That's why, because they have a unique and necessary contribution to the citizens that the government cannot provide, this is why we give them special treatment. The analogy of other organizations we give this kind of treatment to, is organizations such as NGOs or schools or private hospitals, because they fill in that gap that the state cannot fulfill. And but we would want to add one premise here. We only give these organizations tax exemptions and these kinds of privileges as long as they actually do their work, right? As long as if they don't actually do their work, for example, if an NGO does not actually do what it's set out to do, we don't give this organization a tax exemption because it is not filling in that gap that the state needs. And therefore we say that if the organization does not do so, therefore we do not need to provide this kind of additional benefit to these organizations. So secondly, then why does discrimination count as a reason to reduce this kind of tax benefit? Well, we believe that this discrimination leads to the lack of benefits, leads to the impossibility of these organizations of filling in that gap. Why? Because this means that these organizations aren't providing these services to these individuals. For example, if an organization, for example, the Evangelical Church in the United States of America failed to provide wedding services to a gay individual, it means that that gay individual is not getting that spiritual satisfaction, that assuagement of his fears of being part of that, getting that satisfaction of being part of that religious organization that he should have. That means that the organization is not fulfilling its duty, therefore it doesn't need these kinds of tax exemptions, which means that the government can't give value to these organizations. These organizations are invalid, therefore they aren't worthy of these tax exemptions. So this means that the government should, all neutral organizations, for example, corporations or private institutions, exclusive organizations that exclude others, that work only for the profit of themselves, that means that the government should, all of these these other organizations, force these organizations to provide tribute to the government for allowing them to work within their realm. We think that's only legitimate in this case, and therefore if these organizations fail to actually provide the services that they set out to do, that means that they shouldn't be able to gain these services, gain these benefits. Go ahead.
Regardless of what they think, these organizations are still providing some service to these citizens. Why, as a government, will you take away that exemption and stop that providing?
Because we think that all citizens underneath the government are equal, and these organizations can't discriminate on the basis of something that was decided by the birth lottery, like your sexual orientation. We think that that kind of discrimination is completely illegitimate, and the government needs to engineer that kind of social change, which is a really nice flag for my second argument. Thank you. So why is tax exemption cancellation the best form of striking the balance between these organizations? Because firstly, we think that we want to protect the right of these organizations to be able to work autonomously within our realm. We don't want to intervene into these organizations and say they don't have a right to work properly inside our country. However, secondly, we think that the state should engineer this kind of equality. The state should say that these organizations should accept these people within their realms, because we think that the state is the only actor to be able to enter the calculuses of these organizations, because these organizations, especially the Catholic Church and the Evangelical Church in the United States of America, they're especially really conservative, right? They won't change their way of thinking unless someone like the state, who allows them to work within their country, asks them to do something in this way. We think that we want to engineer this kind of social change. We want these gay people to be able to have marriages. We want to engineer that. Therefore, we think that the state has to strike the best balance between the right to religious freedom and also the engineering of equality. Then why is this the best, right? Because this is because we are allowing the activities of these organizations, but we are disallowing this privilege. There's a spectrum of disciplinary measures that we could take in order to stop these organizations from actually working. We could ban them, or we could completely ignore their activities. However, we say that we will want to take this motion because we will still allow them to have the minimum necessary for these organizations to actually work. For example, these people will still get donations or tithes, or the Vatican Bank will still provide them with money. Therefore, these organizations can still work. However, it will still be harmful to these organizations, so we will still give them an incentive. And we're not saying it is not our burden to prove that 100% of these organizations will change, right? However, we say that if there's a spectrum of, again, religious organizations, the more moderate ones will have one step before they actually think about discriminating against people. They will have that they will have a barrier of entry for that kind of discrimination, because that kind of monetary incentive actually counts for these people. We give you the analogy of sin tax, right? Because in the case of tobacco, we don't say that sin tax prevents everyone from taking tobacco, but we think that it stops a lot of people who might have entered into tobacco from taking that tobacco in the first place. Therefore, we say that to engineer this kind of social change while protecting people's right to religion, this is the best method possible. That is why we're extremely proud to advance. Thank you.
Mr. Speaker, we concede some in the world they have liberalized such discriminations for the homosexuals and so forth. In this context, many or some type of the religious organizations who try to open for such a sexual minority or the other minorities. So it means that if you want to believe in the Catholic Church, however, there is some type of the Catholic Church open to support for some type of the peoples. However, they just we're talking about just the limitation of the choice. So however, because of this, why we have to abandon to the more activities for the religious organizations, or to try to ensure that the other people's religious identities and destroy such identities. So for these reasons, we beg to oppose these motions. Two things talking about. Firstly, is that why tax exemptions are given in the first place, and why such a contingent is against it. The secondary explains that how the country more counterproductive to decrease the discriminations in their lives. Because there's some engagement. Firstly, is that they're talking about there is some type of the minorities are very marginalized by the choice of the religious organization or activity of the religious organizations. However, it's not so much biggest issue in the first place, right? Because they have already, as they are considered this world somehow they're more liberalized about such minority issues. They already internalized such ideas. It means that there's some organization try to open such a subtype of the peoples. So that we can already ensure right of the religions somehow. The secondary is they're talking about such a religious tax exemptions is a very efficient way to mitigate such a discriminations. However, they're talking about some very radical people that refuse to the changing. Refuse to changing such a performance in such a context. They have still they are trying to rely on such ideas, and they have a more possibility to radicalize such people. I explained to you in the second argument. So they have a more counterproductive to protect them. Before now moving to the first issue, why the tax exemptions and why the contingent is against it. We believe that such tax exemptions exist because their religious organizations have a unique function to ensure the identities or emotional securities for some type of peoples. Such activities or such doctrines is given or for the some type of peoples what is human beings, how to behave as a humans, and they ensure such important identities or such moralities. Whether or not doctrine is includes such discriminative ideas. However, such functions of such a role is not changing in each religious organizations. So they have regardless of their contents, they will give such a tax exemption. For example, under status quo, their school is exclusive for the girls or some their religious peoples still exist and still get such tax exemptions because they have such a schools is a very beneficial for the peoples, and such exclusivity is a very important thing to manage such a schools. So they have already given us regardless of the discriminations or and so forth. So it's the same cases. So regardless of the contents, they have the same religious organization have the same functions for each peoples. Then what happened in this contingents? Because that I think.
Okay, so are you saying that this discrimination towards these people is legitimate and is an integral part of these religious organizations?
Of course, I already explained this. Using these ways is a very bad thing. So bad things because they have destroyed their identities, or they have difficult to make the religious organization to difficult to manage it. So moving to our issues, what happened in these contingents? There's two case scenarios. First is that they're forced to changing forced to change their doctrines and if you include such religious contents. It's a very bad thing for the religious believers that already exist because they have each doctrine is intangible to feel identity. Why that's so? Because they have such doctrine created and long history, and they feel their identities. Your beliefs from your ancestors, and many people believe in the historical context, and so that we are prize such religious identities. You feel the religious identity. So they're just saying, try to change. However, such identity never change. And secondly. So they have, of course, they try to changing such a content because you can difficult to feel such a religious identity towards such a religious. And you have secondary. I explained you there. If you try to review such a changing activities, they have they decrease the amount of the money and difficult to manage their religions. So it's a very helpful for the religions because they have a less likely to hold rituals for some type of some religious peoples, and they have a decreased the amount of charities and difficult to correct religious believers and they correct such monies. So they have a more likely to the bankrupt. They are such a religious organization, so they have no never feel religious identities and difficult to difficult to correct such created moralities. And second, now moving on to second issue, the why the counterproductive to discriminations, because they are more likely to backlash towards such peoples, because you have to I already explained you destroy such identity, or you have your bankrupt such such religious organizations. It's due to such minorities. So they try to backlash. They backlash towards such minority because you have a strong bias harm. You get bias harm from such peoples. So for these reasons, we beg to oppose.
Thank you for the leader of opposition for her excellent speech. I'd like to welcome the Deputy Prime Minister here.
So ladies and gentlemen, when we do a tax exemption, that is a time we see its value on its unique contribution. But this motion, if some religious organizations are discriminating and actively excluding certain people, we believe that religious organization cannot get that special treatment and privileges. We believe on that side of the house, if they want to get a special treatment and tax exemption, we believe in a minimum level, they have to fulfill their own laws. And we believe the discriminating if government cannot see value and cannot give privileges. And that's why we support this motion. I, as a Deputy Prime Minister, would like to deliver two things. Firstly, why government cannot give them a privilege and why this way of changing is legitimate. And secondly, the why uniquely doing tax exemption is the best way and engaging to the counterproductive argument. So let me explain one by one. So about the first point, the why this intervention is legitimate for the government. So ladies and gentlemen, as I said in my introduction, if they are, what the leader of the opposition explained to us is they are still doing a unique way of contribution. For example, mental security or mental security of these believers. And ladies and gentlemen, in that part, the side from the government side is, of course, diverse way of contribution, plurality, is a good thing. But at the same time, if they want to get a special treatment, they have to fulfill and follow the minimum level of universal right of individual. And in that sense, this motion, their side is doing actively excluding and discriminating individual. For example, if gay people in their community, the many community composer of a community is a Christianity, and gay people want to take part in that religious organization. In that sense, in their paradigm, the Christianity say I'd like to reject you. You are not legitimate part of this community and religious organization. That kind of discrimination is offending. Government can't see value, and this is not within the scope of a unique contribution. So, for example, the NGO cases, in general, we conduct a tax exemption in NGOs. But if some NGO groups are doing, for example, bullying or sexual harassment, if they cannot, they betray the minimum contract, universal contract of our society, we are very, we in our society are exempt, not making, stop the tax exemption. So in the same line, ladies and gentlemen, if they are actively excluding some vulnerable people, we believe that's not the case, and government have to intervene and cannot support that action. Government shouldn't stand on the side of prejudice and bigots. That's the conclusion of the first argument. And before going to the next point, take your point.
These religious organizations are helping vulnerable people, for example, homeless, children without parents, and those kind of people. By taking your policy, these people are going to be vulnerable. Why does the government endorse such kind of policy?
So ladies and gentlemen, here that directly leads to my second point. So why this way of engaging tax exemption is important. So ladies and gentlemen, in the first place, no one is born hating with others based on ethnicity or the sexuality. The people learn to hate others, and if we can learn to hate others, of course we can change it, we can love it. So the question here is how government should make this social engineering or the transition, and we believe on the side of the house, this way of tax exemption is a first step, and also in a long-term scheme of this making the society better and stop excluding vulnerable people. And today's point of information asked me why in their paradigm, other kind of vulnerable people will be again marginalized. But as my partner explained to you, this motion, this way is a balancing out. So in the paradigm, like a minimum level of activity will be guaranteed, like donation. But at the same time, if they are actively, we believe on the side of the house, expanding their religion itself, and also the government standing on the prejudice and subsidizing that discrimination, we believe that shouldn't be what government should do. And also, they explain to us about the right of the religion. But ladies and gentlemen, what is the nature and the essence of the religion? We believe on the side of the house, essence of the religion is like supporting and helping other people, like Christianity, loving neighborhood. So in that sense, their life and their perspective aspect of discriminating other people and excluding other people is what the government cannot see its value. So in that sense, we believe on the side of the house, of course, minimizing, like for example, backlashes or the counterproductiveness, as leader opposition said, we believe this way of engaging is the best way and long-term scheme, and also the first step. That's why this way of engagement is the best way. So before moving to that point,
Your side is sacrificing that is something already conceived good in the society, however they might be discriminating. What kind of good thing are you going to create by your policy? Because I see nothing changing in your policy.
So ladies and gentlemen, as we say, like in our society, there's a diverse and a spectrum of the religion exists. So like sin tax, enforcing fat tax or fat tax, what we are doing is of course like personally leading people in a healthy is a good way, and also we'd like to make this motion as a tipping point, and also the tiebreaker to changing some people. So it's ideal to banish discrimination all in our society, but we believe on the side of the house in order to minimize the negative externalities or the negative impact of the policy, like backlashes, they say, and also we believe on the side of the house, if they change their activity of like discrimination, of course, that then again the time government have to see value. So that's why we are not entirely banishing and banning that kind of religion. So in that sense, we believe on the side of the house as a government, we are seeing the aspect of the discrimination, and if that kind of discrimination occurs, we believe that religion cannot possess a right to receive special treatment, that is tax exemption, and that's why we take this policy. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for the Deputy Prime Minister for his excellent speech. I'd like to welcome the Deputy Leader of Opposition here.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Speaker, this debate is about whether the liberal idea is okay to be forced to all citizens overall, and we defend the right to seek certain discriminative idea should also be admitted by some extent. They pointed out those institutions who are actually exempted on tax should provide unique law to the society. But we agree that actually these institutions who discriminate certain ideas, actually defending the conservative idea, provide unique law to the moral security of the conservative people. We think this is also an important and precious unique law that these institutions are actually uniquely providing for. Actually, they're actually forcing liberal ideas to all people, and we think actually forcing the particular ideology to the all people. We think their policy actually kicking out conservative people from seeking own sense of conformity. We agree that we believe both the liberal and the conservative idea is actually have a right to be saved by society by all people. And we think like those like the source of in this community or source of local community people's identity. We think states should ensure all people's idea, and that's why we should exempt tax exemption. We should exempt all religious institutions in our society. So, as a deputy prime minister, I will point a deputy leader of opposition. I point out 4 things. First, I want to talk to you about why state, the extent of state tax exemption, and how. And now we read that state actually make tax exemption on an institution with discrimination. And second, I will talk about the people's right to discriminate. We believe this right is actually right of self-defense and right of private speech. Thirdly, I will point out how some minority they're actually targeting and pointing out this way is actually less discriminated than they think. Fourthly, I will point out that even if discrimination is something bad, how more radical discrimination can happen, how should it happen in their paradigm. So, every rebuttal is integrated in my point. So my first point, the state's extent of tax exemption and how actually states now tax exempting and tax will have this discrimination. They pointed out like schools or NGOs have unique contribution to society actually tax exempted, but we think actually schools or NGOs actually discriminated institutions. For example, as Linda pointed out, like girls' school, for example, actually discriminate male people from participating. Like even if the court actually, some people sue on the court, actually these male actually not admitted in some cases. And also racial schools, like schools for black people, actually they discriminate white people from entering those schools. And NGO are also our analogy. We believe that some example environmentalist groups actually discriminating the participation of those people who are against the environmentalists or those who destroy environment. For example, radical feminists are actually discriminating males from participating in a feminist organization. These institutions are actually also tax exempted because their thought is ideologically a legitimate one. But then we think if they do not discriminate those people who are actually against or those who have totally different ideas actually forced to participate, we believe these institutions cannot actually stand on their own principle. Therefore, we believe the logical conclusion here is that states actually tax exempt on an institution for actually providing certain benefits to the targeted person, even if it's actually exclusive to certain people. We think if they're providing certain benefits to exclusive people, we think state actually tax exempt on tax. So that is the line that state actually drawing. Second point, we talked about the right to discriminate, and we think it's a actually right of self-defense and a private sphere. We believe actually that people have a right to seek for safety or own moral security. We believe the state must ensure this to all people, including the right to discriminate. Why? Because we believe that forcing people never discriminate, rather kills someone's sense of conformity. We think that some people who want to seek conservative idea actually kicked out and not admitted to seek their own principle. How? We believe it's some people who have gays, for example, who have actually totally different ideas. For example, the Muslim people in Christian community actually enter into the church, for example, Christian church, for example. These people actually totally different ideas, have different clothes, different language, and so on. We believe actually it's like similar to the intruding of their own identity. So actually, how is actually discriminating on those people not entering in those spheres is actually legitimate. Two reasons here. Number one, we believe actually that every community in all spheres actually there is certain limitation on certain activities, which is exclusive activities, to be accountable for the already existing or belonging people. For example, in company, for example, the clothing or hairstyle or color is actually forced, and we think actually it's exclusive to those people, and they are actually discriminating those people who do not actually obey those groups. And also other community, in this community or local community, for example, actually local habits are actually mandated to all people who actually participate or come in to this field. Because we think if they have totally different ideas and try to say own habits, for example, we think actually it actually feel negative perspective. They actually negatively felt by other people, and sense of security actually totally infringed. And like these ways, for example, the second reason, no thank you, like it's actually religious institution actually almost like the private sphere, because we read that these believers actually expose all him or herself in front of the priest, and therefore those people who have totally different idea come in without consent. It's like the stranger abruptly come into your house, your room, or your private sphere, which actually not admitted. Within the state actually also ensure that exclusive community who actually not allow some other people from not coming in. That is the right actually state should admit in certain cases. So in the last 1 minute, I will talk about how their case actually not happen. Number one, first I will talk about how some minorities are actually not discriminated and raising. They pointed out, Arimo-san pointed out in the beginning of her speech, like Pope Francis actually tried to set gay rights, and actually we admit that certain progressive church actually tried to accept gay marriage, for example. In that case, which means that those people who have homosexual identity can actually seek for own marriage in certain religious institutions. Their religious freedom are also ensured in certain cases. What the unique role of certain conductive religious institutions have to seek for is rather be accountable for the other spectrum people, like those people who have other consumptive ideology, which is forcing the liberal idea, certain ideology, actually not enforcement and depriving of certain religious freedom. And second, like, so what I wanted to say, a right to discriminate is actually should also be ensured by the state, and also legitimate rights. And if we force the liberal ideas by depriving tax exemption on those who have conductive idea, is actually killing those certain ideology and forcing certain particular idea, which is what state should not stay for. That's why you make the
To make her speech within 7 minutes, you hear.
Mr. Chair, it's so disappointing that when Tom said discrimination is necessary in order to ensure the disability or better security, we say that discrimination is not necessary for a region, but moreover we say as a government, we cannot give the privilege to those organizations which justify discrimination, and that's why we propose. So I will answer 3 questions in my speech. Firstly, is discrimination core part of religion? And second, as a government, which we should prioritize? And finally, I will compare the consequence and preview why the harm we talked about, such as the discrimination toward a particular minority, is much more serious than the harm they talked about. So on to my first point, is discrimination core part of religion? So firstly, they talked about the examples such as the schools which is exclusive to the women, or those radical feminism which reject the men to participate in, and so forth. But firstly, we have to understand the importance of participation is totally different from these organizations they talked about and the leaders' organization. We say, for example, even if boys cannot go to the school exclusive for the women, they can go to the other school which allow and which welcome the men and so forth. And also, for example, even if men cannot participate in the radical feminism, still they can participate in other moderate feminism, right? So, but on the other hand, in the case of religion, we have to understand the choice is limited. For example, when you are born, because environment decide what religion you belong to. For example, when you are born in the religious community, generally you believe Christian. Even if you are gay, still you believe the Christian because you are told from the mother or from the community members that Christianity is good and so forth. But in this case, we have to recognize that firstly, these people cannot change the religion, they cannot change their belief to the Muslims in the religious community. It's so hard. But secondly, we think in this case, this participation is very important in order to ensure their emotional security because they believe God. But other people said that God do not trust you, or other people say that God reject you, we think its mental damage is significant. That's why we think their example is not applicable in this case. But secondly, and more importantly, we have to understand, even if there's a radical religious people, on the other hand, there's a moderate people. For example, as Arimoto-san said, even if some conservative Christianity reject LGBT, other Christianity or even Pope recently allow the existence of LGBT. Which means we do not understand why discrimination is exclusively necessary for the religious belief. But secondly, as a government, which we should prioritize. So, Linda said, even if some religion discriminates, still they fulfill their role, such as ensuring the mental security and so forth. But firstly, we have to understand, government cannot prioritize or cannot give the privilege to the institutions which prioritize particular people's rights by allowing offend or discrimination, because the responsibility of government is ensure that all people's right to religion equal, right? So, for example, even if the radical groups such as KKK hold the hate speech to black people, because in order to achieve their religious not, but achieve their belief, still those hate speech is not allowed in many countries, right? And also, for example, even if those radical Muslims hold the hate speech to the Christianity, it's not also government do not allow it, right? Because government do not allow those hate speech which is exclusive and which is discriminated to some particular people, even if those hate speech allow other people's religious belief. That's why moreover, secondly, we have to also understand this debate is about what kinds of organization government should give the privilege, right? We clearly told you that the criteria of privilege is whether those organizations ensure the people's right or people's benefit sufficiently. That's why, for example, we said even NGO, and if NGO do the illegal things such as deceiving their amount of income and so forth, still government get the privilege or such as tax exemption. That's why we think as long as those religious organizations cannot ensure everyone's emotional security, still we think that shouldn't receive the benefit. Yes.
If you believe that state must ensure a diversity of values in society, why that it is okay to kick out conservative ideology?
Firstly, we do not totally kick out, right? We just deprive the privilege. As my partner already told you, even under our paradigm, those conservative religious people can still do their minimum level of religious activity, right? But secondly, we think even if we kick out, we think our paradigm is still better, because under your paradigm, you kick out some particular minority, right? So it's not exclusive harm on our side. So finally, let's compare the consequence. Firstly, they said under our paradigm, those religious organizations do not have the sufficient money, so it destroys the religious identity. But firstly, we do not understand how our paradigm, those lack of money or lack of tax exemption destroy the identity. We create those, even under our paradigm, we can ensure the minimum level. But under their paradigm, those LGBT or those people's right of religion is totally deprived, right? So we have to be comparative. We think our paradigm is better because we can ensure every people's right to religion. So, Mr. Jones, this is a comparison, right? And we say even if somehow those conservative religions are somehow get damaged, still we think we should prioritize to protect the minority people, and that's why we.
Thank you for the government for her excellent speech. I'd like to welcome the opposition whip to make his speech with himself.
So, Mr. Speaker, government side came up today and talked about their good ideas. So government should be all beneficial. Government shouldn't be discriminative. Yes, we believe that's so. Opposition side isn't saying that our government is going to perpetuate discrimination on people. We're just saying that we're not discrimination. And let me tell you one thing, one crucial thing that lacked an opposition government side. They lacked the consequence. What is going to happen? I have asked the Prime Minister, why are you taking away this good thing? What's going to happen? She just said, no, it's something the government has to say. And then the second speaker, he too said that I asked him, these organizations are already providing somewhat benefit to these people. But his answer was, no, it's just for the sake of goodness. Now let me tell you in my whip speech, first of all, what is going to happen, why religious exemption is something needed, and why it is better in our paradigm, and the government side completely contradicts with their own argument and has no legitimacy. And second, what is going to happen? I was going to tell you, after analyzing what is going to happen, let me tell you why our paradigm is better. So, let me move on to my arguments. All my arguments will be integrated into my arguments. So first, about religious exemption. So Prime Minister gave the very good example of description, and our leaders also told you the very good description of religious exemption. Religious identities, religious entities provide benefits that the state cannot provide to the citizens, which might come in many forms. It might be practical. That's what our leader of opposition said. It might be education. It might be medication. It might be shelter for homeless. It might be education for orphans. Those kind of things, as I said, as you can see what I'm talking, is not that regarded of the discrimination. Those things are provided equally. But then, why does government side oppose to this thing? Because these religious organizations are discriminating and it's not providing these people. What I see, as our side has been saying, is a complete mismatch in what they're trying to say. These religious entities are providing benefit to people, and then there's at the same time somewhat discriminating other people. And providing benefit is not contingent on there being discriminated. What is going to be happening in the government side paradigm is actually what we have been saying. These people are not going to be able to get that benefit. These organizations will not be able to provide that benefit the government side has acknowledged and has ensured to this point. And let me tell you my later argument what is going to happen. So from the perspective of religious exemption, when the government side is somewhat saying it is important, it's very uncontradicting and not supported from the government side. Let me move on to my second argument, the most important thing. What is going to happen? So government side today is proposing this motion as if there's some kind of dichotomy or trade-off, let me say, between the discriminated people and the religious entities. But that is not true. Our side has told you, and government side even said, it's an increasing context. Some people are still ignoring. Some religious entities are taking in these people when other religious entities are discriminating. So in the first place, there are people who are completely denied in any case. Even the Prime Minister said the Catholic Church is taking in discriminated people. Gay rights, and those people are accepted. But then, what is happening is that by taking this policy, these religious entities are going to be not existing, are going to be having a harm. Let me tell you what is going to happen, because government side failed to tell us. First of all, after taking this policy, to talk what's going to happen, we must talk what is happening right now. And this was the argument given from our leader of opposition. Again, no engagement from government side. We have told you how scarce these religious entities are, that these monies are given in, are used, for example, many things, education, organization, soup kitchens, providing shelter. Those kind of monies are used. There's very little space for these religious entities. That's the current context. That's what we're talking about. Then, what's the obvious thing which is going to happen after we take this policy? That income is going to decrease. They might have said that the Catholic Church is going to give them, there's going to be donations, but they're going to tax it. And that income is going to get smaller. So these religious entities are going to face a choice. First is that they have to follow the government. Second, they have to cater to those people who are most paying, as my second speaker said. Or third, they can't do anything, they just go back. Let me tell you what is going to happen in each kind of choice. First of all, I gave you a choice that they might follow the government. But this is not happening, because what kind of religious entity would people believe when they start changing their ideas at a day because the government says? What kind of people can rely onto these religious entities? What they want from these religious entities is stability, something that they can rely on. If a religious entity changes their ideas, one of their main dogmas, suddenly people will not follow that. people will not believe in that kind of religious identity because it completely contradicts what people want from these religious identities. So those kind of things are not happening. So what is going to happen in government paradigm, what you can tell right now, is that these religious entities are going to be a forced choice. What they try to assure that these religious entities have a free choice is not going to be happen. It's going to be the latter two choices. Before moving on, yes.
So why you say like discrimination is a necessary component of helping people, and why government have to still monetary supporting their action?
What we have been saying is that it's not contingent to the help. Yes, there might be some discriminative ideas, but also there's some, let's say, legitimacy in their own ideas, and they want to do those things. They want to exploit people, what every kind of society, like my second speaker said. And also, the help they're giving is not like it's not only about gay marriage. You're trying to eliminate other kind of helps, and your side completely did not engage in that. So that's the problem. Let me go on further. So, what is going to be happen as my second? So these religious entities need money, like our second speaker has said. Then they're going to cater to the people who have the most money, who are most enthusiastic in money, who are willing to donate a lot of money into these religious entities. And then what's going to happen, like my first speaker said, these religious entities, against the government's will, are going to be more discriminated because those people want those kind of things. Those religious entities have to follow. So what is going to happen, A, is that these religious entities, against the government's proposal, are going to be more radical. And the second is what's going to be happen, probably most likely, is that these religious entities can't do anything anymore. If they don't want to be that radical, and if they don't want to change their ideas suddenly, they don't have money, they can't provide their benefit to society. So what is going to happen from the obvious all of the reasons is that these religious entities cannot provide that help which they have been providing and what the government side has acknowledged anymore. So let me tell you what the consequence is. There is no trade-off between these religious entities and discriminated people. These discriminated people, still somewhat in some places they might be discriminated, but as like the Prime Minister said, these people can get that support. But on the other hand, these religious entities cannot provide that help anymore. Those entities are forced to take a different choice, and their religious freedom is not assured, like government side said. So for all these reasons, that these religious entities are going to be coerced into a worse situation, and the benefit that is in current society, which is helping the vulnerable people actually right now, is going to be taken away. Even if they're somewhat discriminative, we still have to let these religious entities to have this exemption. That is why we're going to propose it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the opposition whip for his excellent speech. I'd like to welcome the last speaker of the opposition. The opposition replied to close the opposition case within 4 minutes to hear.
Mr. Speaker, even if they discriminate sometimes reports, as long as they fulfill the role as a religious organizations, we believe it deserves the tax exemptions. What government tries to is that they're picking up the one perspectives and they deny all of the other contributions and try to stop their identity or rituals and so forth. So we didn't allow such actions, such tactics. For these reasons, we beg to oppose these motions. Now, I will now point out the two crucial assumptions coming from the government side. First is that why a tax exemption is not just privilege, and there's such a contingent is so crucial to manage their religious organizations. The secondly, I explained why the protection from such a discriminations is not so much there. It's not so much big. A big extent, and we're considering such a context under status quo. Now, first is that they have there's about the privilege. They just talking about privilege. However, such a meaning of such a tax exemption is a very serious for the religious organizations because there is first is that they have we have to they're supposed to changing the one sentence of the doctor in the one part of important part of the ideas of the other religious organizations. So there you cannot turn over you can pass such ideas coming from the such ancient peoples and so forth. And it means that they're denied such identities. The second reason is a very important crucial thing for the physical status. So there is for a religious organization they have biggest physical issues, so difficult to manage it. So it's not tax exemption, not just privilege. Now, privilege. So it's a very crucial thing. The question is such religious activities or actions of the religious organizations deserve such a punishment. It's a very heavy punishment for the such religious organizations. However, we answered it's not true because my partner already explained this. They have we're talking about this such that even if they discriminate some type of peoples, however, still exists to still supports existence of the such minority people. For example, the pop process, the degree that exists or approve the existence of the homosexuals. However, we refuse such for example, wedding ceremonies is a very important perspective for them to manage such a Catholic church and so forth. However, the other church already accept or try to open toward such the minorities. So it means that they were talking about subtle limitations of the choice. So so it's not so much the marginalized and such the people's identity. So we release such a heavy punishment is a very too serious for the religious organizations. Now, for this reason, we have to compare the such discrimination. So we of course we admit we have to try to tackle with some discriminations. However, this tactics is not so much appropriate for to minimize such discriminations. Now, for this reason, we beg to oppose.
Thank you very much for the thank you for the opposite reply for excellent speech. I'd like to welcome the last speaker of the government bench. The government replied to close the government case within 4 months here.
To begin my speech, I'd just like to point out the lack of consistency from the three speakers on the opposition side. Firstly, Linda-san said discrimination is not allowed, but the doctrine change is so pernicious, and that's the reason for not taking this motion. Secondly, Tom-san said that no, discrimination is okay, but pushing values on these organizations is what's bad, and that's why we should oppose this motion. And then Julius came up and said, no, well, discrimination is okay, but because these organizations give food to homeless people, that's why we shouldn't take this motion. Okay, that makes no sense at all, and they don't have this kind of unified stance on their side. And we'd like to rebut all 3 points on their side of the house from the reply speech. Okay, so firstly, let's talk about Linda-san's talk about discrimination and how doctrine change is so bad, right? Well, firstly, we say that society is changing, as I said from the beginning of my PM speech, and we think that religion needs to be relevant to these people. And as long as they are relevant to these people, even if the doctrine changes, these followers will still come with these people. And since that came up in her reply speech again, I'd like to point it out in my reply speech. But secondly, even if that unity was so important, we told you how this could actually become part of the calculus of these people, and how the tax exemption would be the best measure in order to regulate all of the decision-making calculuses of these organizations. And that's why this reduction of tax exemption was the best possible method that we could take. Secondly, let's talk about Tom-san's idea that how discrimination is okay, but pushing values on people is legitimate, right? Okay, so Tom-san is pretty much talking about how the protection of the right to discriminate, which means that they're protecting the right to shut me out of the parliament because I am a woman and the parliament is a totally male organization. He's saying that they have the right to segregate buses, that white people can sit and black people have to stand because buses are an institution in which only white people can sit down. Okay, so he's saying that rhetoric of bigotry, that these organizations, these institutions should be as they are allowed to discriminate. And we think, however, on the government side, that the state should oppose this kind of discrimination based on immutable characteristics. think that all humans are created equal, and it's the state's job to socially engineer that kind of change. And we think that this is the best method in order to do it, right? Because we're not, as Tom said, trying to characterize this as doing, we're not forcing these organizations to actually change at gunpoint. We're saying that these people, if they want to get that full benefit from the state, they have to provide those kinds of psychological benefits to the people that the state wants to protect. And this was something that was mischaracterized on Julius's part, because he talked about like the material benefits that these organizations could provide. But we were talking about the psychological benefits. For example, like talk about funerals, talk about like mass, talk about congregations. That's what I characterized in my first PM speech, but he refused to listen to that, and he only talked about like providing food to the homeless people. And like seriously, that's not what this debate is about. This is about these people being being refused to perform like these kinds of religious services, right? So we think that they like mischaracterized that as well. Thirdly, let's talk about like that kind of backlash, and like even if that occurred, why that's not really important. Okay, so even if that kind of backlash actually occurred, that's not mutually exclusive. Why is that? This is because this kind of backlash is already existent in status quo, right? Because if they have that much hatred to the LGBT community, then they would have a backlash in the first place. If they don't change by taking this notion, that would mean that they would have that kind of annoyance and hatred towards the LGBT to start with, and we think that that's only a marginal harm on their side of the house. However, we say that our paradigm would be actually better for these people, because the larger scale of moderates who would actually be influenced by this motion would tilt toward the LGBT people. This would mean that these people would have more benefits. These people would be able to access these services. And we think that's a comparative benefit, and it's a larger benefit on their side of the house. Because let's face it, the conservatives are a small number of people. But we think that the moderates who will be changed by this motion are wider. These LGBT people and all other discriminated groups will gain more benefits on our side of the house. And at the best case scenario for the opposition, there are about an equal number of people who are poor and will not be able to gain these services, as they are an equal number of people who can't gain these like psychological services in their paradigm. We think that as long as those two are equal, we think that because these services are not mutually exclusive, the government can provide food, for God's sake, but these psychological services are, we think that that's enough reason to take our paradigm. The tax exemption is the best way to tackle discrimination that the government needs to. That's why we're extremely proud to propose. Thank you.